Warning: this episode contains some strong language. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to Tales from the Trunk, reading the stories that didn't make it. I'm Hilary B. Bisniaks. Listeners, I'm super excited to have somebody on the show today who is involved in two different parts of publishing. Dave Ring is both an author and publisher of Neon Hemlock Press. Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's been one of my goals to have you on the show for quite some time, and I'm super excited to be making that happen.
I'm excited to be sought after.
Neon Hemlock is one of my very favorite small presses. I've just loved the work that you've been doing for quite a while at this point, and I'm sure we'll be getting into that some later in the show.
It's kind of you to say, and I'm delighted to be here.
So, Dave, you're going to be reading to us from Checks and Balances, correct?
Yes.
All right. And is there anything that we need to know about it before we get into it?
No, it's good to drop you in, and the parts that aren't good about just dropping you into it, we can talk about afterward, because that's partly why I'm here.
Sounds good. Well, I'm ready when you are.
Checks and Balances. The SE unit smoothed her skirts at the edge of the table. You brought the paperwork requesting decontamination and resource acquisition. I needed to get this site cleared yesterday. Here. I pushed the sheaf of papers across the table. I'll be damned. Talking to a robot. Thank you. Coffee? The SE queued up the clip on her display and held out a tray. My mouth watered as the recording started. I ought to reject it out of principle, but I hadn't had coffee in months. The footage lingered on a scene shot from a vertiginous angle, the frame dominated by sundered cobblestones and monstrous trees dwarfing a toppled white bell tower. The view panned across the ground to a burning building. I peered at it. A number of sites of interest had been flagged for my crew, but they weren't the focus of the clip. What did you record this with? I asked, adding a dash of cream to my cup. It looks different than the Cairo footage. The SE tapped the corporate logo engraved on the table. We employed 2 clusters of Dr. Albano's drones in Ireland, just as we did in Egypt. Is there a concern, Lieutenant? I didn't bother looking down at the stylized ears, like I could forget who owned everything on this station. I took a sip of heaven and rewound the clip again, pausing it on the gaping hole. You spent a lot of time on this structure here, even though the resources we need are closer to the harbor. The SE fidgeted, flicking an access port on her index finger open and closed. Disgusting habit. Expedition protocol requires sampling mnemonic data from the affected areas in order to gauge their impact on the manifestations. I leaned back. For a formality, this sure was taking forever. I'm aware. From the deceased residents. I still don't know whether memories should matter on these expeditions. The SE cocked her head. And as stated in station records, Dr. Albano found links between the narrative samples and the... What even are narrative samples? Certainly can't look at them on a slide. I couldn't help but sneer. We need more ships in the void, not more research. Can't build an engine out of narrative samples. Did you know that they called that bell tower a campanile? She gestured towards where the bit of white architecture would have lain, just out of frame. And they said that if you were underneath it when the bell rang, you would never graduate. That's just one story, and well before that, the diaspora from this region was known for a host of shared narratives and history that... Do you have any more of this stuff? I interrupted again. My mug was empty. If I let her talk, we'd be here all day. In this burning building, a library, the SE said, voice quavering. She leaned over my cup with her carafe. Fragrant steam plumed upward from the cup. It was called the Long Room. All those stories just gone. I inhaled the steam greedily. It really tickled me that I was spinning through the blackness of space, talking to a robot crying about a bunch of useless ash. Foolishness. Surely all the important information was scanned and uploaded. I squinted at the paused video, beginning to put two and two together. Not thanks to the Essie. It was right there, plain as day, a cluster of faces looking out from the hole. They were almost human until you saw the absurd scales and fangs and wings that sprouted out from any number of inappropriate orifices. Nothing our children should ever have to see. More vermin. How many of these creatures were there? We'll need them burnt off before we head down. Can't be wasting good men on any more monsters. She began to say more, but I couldn't pay attention. Why would they have programmed her with non-verbals? Unnecessary. And until you ask the right questions about these people, you'll keep coming up with the wrong answers, she said. Wait. My pulse started hammering against my neck. The Essie looked at me. Did you just call them people? She cocked her head. As I said, they're infestations, I said. I slammed my hand down on the desk. The mug shattered, precious black liquid pooling in the engraved logo on the table. Living fricking nightmares. Not people. We're people. And they're in our way. The robot's silence told me full well that she understood my we did not include her. We will be making a recommendation to the courts that these specimens are also people. Until they decide, my report and this meeting are concluded, Lieutenant. A recommendation? We're scheduled to head down in less than 24 hours. All I'd needed was the Essie's damned signature. I looked down at the papers in my hands. They were brown and damp. At some point, I'd crumpled them in my fist. I need you to authorize these immediately. As I said, the site has not been cleared. Additional samples must be retrieved. Her tone didn't waver. Heat filled my cheeks. Give them too much leeway and they got notions. Her ID listed her model. This is unacceptable, Essie Admin 67034. I need to speak to your manager. Certainly. I'll forward your request to Essie Admin 274. It will be processed in the next 2 to 10 business days. Please expect a response from Dr. Obano within 48 hours after that. Rage boiled in my gut, but I knew when I'd been beat. I got to my feet, trying to think of how I'd explain this to the general. You're going to get turned into a can opener. You can file a complaint via the internet portal. I'll be sure to alert the good doctor to your incoming communication. She turned her wrist to glance at the numbers that flashed blue through her brown skin. Another frivolous, unnecessary gesture. I'd been dismissed. Have a lovely day. And that's it.
Woo. Oh, Dave. My goodness.
I think it's kind of fun, but so this is part of a series of linked Flash that I've got all related to these robots, these androids that are named Essie, and and this one has done the rounds, been sent to a lot of places, but I feel like it's just too enmeshed in the world building, and I haven't set it up well enough on its own for it to finish satisfyingly there. So I'm gonna I think I'm gonna end up cannibalizing it for something longer, but I've decided to give up the ghost and letting it pretend that it's a story on its own.
I mean, I am wholly guilty of that. I think it's something that, we can very easily fall into, especially when we do so much world building in our heads that we can't tell as writers what we put down on the page.
Yeah, and a common offense of mine is under describing because of a fear of info dumping. Mm-hmm. So, one of the things, like for longer work in particular, that I usually have to ask critique groups for or whatnot is, where did you just not have enough information?
Mm-hmm.
But for a story at this length, I think I've just got too much stuff in there that I'm not willing to cut. And the other part is because it's connected to these other stories that, like, I can't just change the reality of the story to trim it. Like, those things are true regardless. So it's got too much connective tissue. It needs to go to something else, and I will stop pretending that it stands alone as well as I'd like it to.
That makes sense, and it's also, it's one of those things that just feels like, yeah, you just need to read the other ones, and then you have the content.
Yeah, like I have a chapbook that I think needs maybe one more piece, and then or maybe it needs a bunch of like little ephemera type pieces to flesh it out, but that are based around this character. I've only found a home, like a proper home, for one of them in a short-lived zine called Trouble Among the Stars.
Oh, neat.
But which is set much further in the future than this particular one. But chapbooks and zines aren't as common in sci-fi world as I would like, but because I spend a bunch of time in literary world as well, I know how common they are in other genres, so I keep trying to make them happen over here too.
I mean, look, I am 100% here for chapbooks and zines being more of a thing in the sci-fi world. It is,
but it's like here because it's my work, so I can't keep. Someone says like I can't keep publishing myself, So I've let little bits of mine creep into some of the zines, like bits and pieces with Void Junk or some of the other projects where it's like supporting role, but that's a trap as a publisher. You can't put out your own stuff, so I will continue to try to find a home for it.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that I've definitely seen your mark in a contributing way on Void Junk in particular, with the art for issue 1, issue 2. God, I have them right here in front of me, and I can't remember the cover for issue 1 that, like, you pinged some people and was like, "Can I get teeth?"
The back cover of issue 1. Yeah, that was a weird day in the Slack. It was like, and then people were calling them toothies.
Yeah,
which I feel like the actual photos are horrific on their own. Like people just gave me these selfies looking down their gullets, and luckily I was just overlaying them on each other with with stars and space in the background. So they were hopefully a different kind of horrifying when I was done with them. But the raw material was difficult to look at.
Yeah, I believe it. I believe it. Full disclosure, my teeth are on that back cover somewhere. I keep on looking at that back cover and being like, "What is that?" I'm pretty sure that's one of my teeth.
I'm not even sure which are mine at this point. There's one that I'm like, that must be it, but then the one next to it doesn't look quite right. So I think I suitably, made a chimeric type monster out of everybody. That it's a weird scavenger
good
hunt.
Tooth maw thing, Bront. So I did want to kind of ask you, because you have your background in the more literary side of things, literary in heavy air quotes.
Heavy air quotes.
And as a publisher, what goes into, for you, assembling a chapbook of your own stuff? Because that's, I think, something that a lot of people, it feels kind of related to the idea of assembling a collection, but in a much more, I don't know, sort of intentional way.
Maybe just concise. I don't know. I mean, I think you can do each one. Either, I mean, if it's a lot of stories or just a couple, you can slap them together, or you can belabor your choices, right? But so I don't want to be too confident on this one because I haven't actually placed this chapbook I've spent a lot of time on. So, but I have also thought about it from the editor side of the house. I've been lucky for so I used to be the chair of the DC's outright LGBTQ literary festival, right? And while I was chair, we launched this chapbook competition that had categories in fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. And to stack the deck a little bit, my fiction judges have been from the speculative side of the house. So 1 year Neon Yang judged, and then the following year River Solomon judged. And then this coming year is Darcy Little Badger is the judge. So awesome writers, and I knew that I was likely their appreciation of speculative work wasn't hard to predict, right? So the winners of those chapbooks, one is Brendan Williams Childs, and his has 3 short stories. And then the second year, it's Paula Molina Acosta was the winner, and her collection, or her chapbook, had 2 stories that were a bit longer. I think one's a novelette and one's a short story. So in those cases, the work is longer, and maybe my vocabulary is failing me. I'm thinking about how if you've got 2 things on the wall and you're looking at 2 paintings, you can spend some time thinking, like, what are some of the themes or the common elements between the 2 of them, right? So you can do that with both the chapbooks. With if you're using more pieces or shorter work, it starts to feel a little bit more like poetry almost, in the sense where you really have to look at what's the ligature between these different pieces. So I've largely been staying with literal linked work where they involve the same categories, which is almost like the lazy way out, right? Like, clearly these are related. They have similar characters. But I've also read some really cool ones through those contests where folks have linked more disparate work, and the themes and the way that you sort of approach the work as a small body just feels a little bit different because of that. That was super long-winded, sorry, but
no, that was good.
It's I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't know. I know it when I see it, and some people are really good at it, and that's one of the benefits of being in my seat is even if I don't get to publish it all, it's really cool to see the way people approach putting together a body of work.
I mean, look, that sounds like a good answer from where I'm sitting.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things with, I don't know that it's talked, well, I think you hear it a little bit, particularly with like reading Slush. Like, one of the best benefits of being an editor or a publisher is just changing how you view and consume work, and what that then does for your own craft. Yeah,
I've definitely experienced that. I'm starting to get a bit of experience with that as an editor. Annalie Flower Horn, who's a local to you, and I are co-editing we're calling it an issue. It's really more of an insert in the November issue of Friends Journal, which is the U.S. Quaker magazine of Quaker speculative fiction.
Yeah. I've sent a couple people your way.
Fantastic.
Yeah, because you just mentioned it, and all of a sudden it's like, there's a few people that you know that would be zooming onto that theme real quick. So
yeah, listeners, you have until August 23rd of 2021 to get your submissions in. Details in the show notes, as always. But you know, I've started to get a bit of that experience as an editor, and I've done Slush for a couple of competitions in the past where I've had that like every time I come out of it feeling both just like completely elated for the community writ large of writers, of just being able to see so much cool work, even with all of the things that you just have to say no on, maybe from sentence one, and richer for myself as a creator.
Yeah, I mean, the dark side to that whole thing of getting to witness so much cool stuff before it's out in the world is that you then have to say no to a lot of that cool stuff, which is not pleasant, and especially when it's having to say no to folks that professionally, or you really like the story but it wasn't right for the project, or there's a lot of those kind of reasons. But it's also given me a lot of patience and sympathy for the no's that come back on my work as well, so there's that.
Yeah, for sure. And it is like, that is something that I really didn't have an appreciation for the first decade that I was working in this field, where I hadn't really done any slushing and hadn't really done hadn't had any editing gigs or anything like that, where it's really easy for it to just feel impersonal, and the reality is it's just so I know for myself, I'm glad I'm getting to co-edit this issue, this insert, and I'm also very glad that it's somebody else's money that's actually paying the writers, because I've made no bones about it in the past. If I were running a magazine, I would go broke because I would just want to buy all the stories.
It's hard. I mean, that's partly why you come up with other limits ahead of time, like with Baffling Magazine that I co-edit with Craig Gidney. It's tied, the number of stories that we buy is tied to the income from our Patreon. So that's meant to limit us from just buying all the things that we like.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it is I if I were to realistically do something like that, it would be, I have this much money set aside per issue. That's literally all I can do unless people give me more money for it.
Yeah, I mean, and then things like Kickstarters come in too, where it's, you budget them based off of how big those get, and use that to rein yourself in. So sitting here as we are recording, the Neon Hemlock 2021 novella series is still finishing up its Kickstarter. By the time this releases, that will be over. But I wonder if you could talk to me just a little bit. I very rarely have publishers on. Talk to me a little bit about what it's like doing the novella series every year. Well, so this is just my second year, so I don't want to be too complacent about it.
Fair.
It's been pretty rapid fire, little pell-mell is maybe the feel of it for these last year and also this year. That's partly why I also read ahead and chose works for the 2022 series already to get myself out of that sort of cannonball feeling.
Right.
Because for the first 2 years, I read for them in October, and then I put them out the following year, and it was just a really fast turnaround. So with that said, don't do that, kids. Is what I'm trying to say. Is give yourself a little bit more lead time. But it's been really cool, and there's been a great reception for them in both at the individual community level, and then also in some ways with the critical reception and Stone and Steel is up for an Ignite Award. Yellow Jessamine was on the Locus 2020 recommended reading list.
Yep.
And the first two books in 2020, they sort of bore the brunt of the pandemic because they came out April 5th, which is right when
Mhm.
everything was nosediving at first, which is a shame because they're really cool books. Like they're very different from each other, but they've both garnered really impressive and insightful reviews from folks who sort of got what they were going for, and I'm hoping that as people sort of find their feet again in 2021, whenever that happens, that I can get more eyes on those books.
Yeah.
But that wasn't exactly what your question was. You were asking sort of like what the process is like. Novellas are cool. They're longer to sink your teeth into than a short story, but they have their own cover. They feel like a book. You feel like you've ticked off a book in your hand.
They count on Goodreads.
They count on Goodreads, and I feel like it's a length that people have been really responding to. And I don't have really the economic chops to explain this yet, but it just feels like there's like a market need for it as well as a reader need. Like we've been doing really well, and the Kickstarter funded within 3 days, I think, and now everything's gravy, and we're just going for stretch rewards. So as a venture for a small press to sort of be hitching a horse to carriage to, hopefully maybe
something to it.
Maybe the novellas are the horse and we're the carriage. It's been a cool way to get my feet wet as a publisher, in addition to the anthologies. So, and just because there aren't that many markets for it, or there are less markets for novellas, so there's also a lot of like a groundswell of enthusiasm from folks looking to submit their work.
I remember, gosh, it was probably literally a decade ago at this point, when, and I'm not providing background links about this because Jeff Bezos doesn't need any more money, but the whole Kindle singles thing was like, this huge company even then trying to like throw its muscle behind the idea of doing novellas without calling them novellas, because like my feeling is that talking about like novel, novella, novelette is very sort of insider baseball for a lot of people, that like unless you pay attention to the Hugo categories and then also pay attention to everybody's eligibility posts, you don't know what's necessarily going to be a like clock in at any particular category.
Yeah, novelette is not a title that your average reader responds to.
Yeah.
that's not a thing. But I think novella people do know sometimes, but they also just get called books.
Yeah.
And because I think we all read books that are just short books, especially, I don't know, there's a lot of books in the canon, as it were, that like would be thought of that way. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I remember those from college and high school mostly because they were very easy to get through quickly, which was something I appreciated.
Some of them, I don't know. There are a few that still were kind of a slog. I still haven't quite forgiven of Mice and Men. I think that's a novella.
When we're talking about canon, we're gonna get into a slog at some point, and I'm not gonna name names, but you dead authors know who you are. So the other thing, we sort of touched on this a little bit, but are there any things in particular that, as an editor and as a publisher, have really fed your writing as a creator?
Oh, I think there's certain stories that when I've read them have given me like it's not a eureka moment because it's not like an idea I've had, but it's more it's kind of like an oh shit moment. oh, this is good, like that kind of a feeling. And then getting a chance to zero in a bit on what that comes from, and sort of when I've had that reaction. It's not always something I can replicate. Like one example is like in Unfettered Hexes, the story that H.A. Clarke, who wrote Scapegracers, contributed for the story. Like their language is I don't like it's like pop rocks or something. Like when you're when I'm reading it, like so and I have that kind of feeling when I read their writing. And I also had it with a another story. I think it was Tanya Chen's, which is like a little it's called Foreclosure, and it's like a almost like a Black Mirror vibe, but in short story form. Yeah, so just some of those kind of stories where I've been so like enthralled by the work that it's pulled the editor hat off, so to speak. That's a cool moment. So just, and then thinking about like what made that happen, and then thinking about can I do that? It's also been sometimes just like cool formats, different devices that people have kind of chosen, and then it's like, how do I open my own mind to those kind of devices?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it is, you know, I think it's kind of just a thing of like getting the volume of cool stuff that comes through, and like I know that I read a whole lot more when I'm slushing, just because I'm doing that. Like, you know, I obviously want to enjoy the things I'm reading and like want them to succeed, and want them to succeed for the, you know, whatever publication I'm reading for. But I'm also like aware like this is a job, and it like tricks my brain into reading in a way that like is more critical or like analytical sometimes.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something that I didn't quite say earlier, which is and it's not like it's not a fugue state, it's not the feeling that you get from like economy of motion with a physical thing. It's not that kind of a it's not that kind of joy. That's not the right word. But you're just it sort of reminds me, like I did my undergrad in sociology, and I finished with a lot of stuff related to film and thinking about gender in film. And it got to the point where it was really hard to watch a movie without thinking about like the male gaze or like other sorts of like analysis. So when you're in editor mode, I think, and you're reading a lot of work, you are sort of reading it from this perspective of, is this working? And is this doing what it needs to be doing, rather than more of a simple what's happening next, which is maybe a more pure reader mode, is like what's happening next. Like
it feels like what you were saying with it not being quite economy of motion, but it is a sort of, I feel almost like a flow state of, you are
flow
like,
state. That's the right.
You're following like the rocks on the riverbed and flowing around them, and you know when you hit something. Like you notice every single rock you go over, but when you get to like a big eddy, to be able to like pick up on that in a way that, you know, I think sometimes you don't get as just a normal reader, because, you know, hopefully that has been smoothed out of the final product.
Sure. I mean, sometimes I feel like you still end up doing that just with a casual. I mean, I keep coming back with film, but like, I don't know. I've been watching The Nevers lately and having lots of like, are these the storytelling decisions that I would have chosen if I was editing this? And
Right.
so yeah, it can still happen in just your everyday life, but it's 100% the place that I'm in editor brain. And that's when it's cool, when a story pops you out of editor brain and it pops you out of that place and you actually are just along for the ride. That's a really cool feeling in the moment, even if it ends up meaning like, I have to read this again. Because I was just reading it for enjoyment and not for the discerning eye. So
yeah, and that, like, I think that's something that all of us as writers can relate to, in that, like, at some point in your writing career, if you make it into any sort of a career, you're going to have places where, like, you have to read a thing not for the enjoyment of it, but for the mechanics of it in one way or another. And, like, I was rereading a project that I hadn't picked up since 2018 the other week, and, like, there were definitely times where I was like, oof, I get why this wasn't working initially, but there were times where I, like, made it several pages, like, wait, no, I have to back up because I wasn't paying attention to what I actually needed to be doing here, and, like, you know, completely understood where there were other points where I was like, oh yeah, this is a typo that hopefully would not make it to, you know, a submission packet, but totally, like, made it past every other reading I've done of this thing.
Yeah, I love when time has passed since the last time you read something, and then you come back and you're like, you see a lot of different things, and it gives you a chance to think about what's changed in you, or like what were you not observing the first time around.
Yeah. And, you know, I think especially reading our own work, it's very cool to, like, I think so much of the conversation, and I think part of this for myself is, like, because of how I had initially conceived of this show, like, my first draft thought that Sarah Gailey talked me out of was get authors on to read their juvenilia and, like, have a laugh and a cringe at things, as opposed to this, which I think is more rooted in kindness and is more the show I actually want to be making. But that so much of the like, conversation about our trunked works is around, like, going back to a thing we wrote 10 years ago and saying, oof, no thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking about the palpable level up in writing, where you see, like, oh, I can just, if I redid this now, I would just do it better. But I think, but you're reminding me too just of projects that, luckily, I think what's lucky for me is a lot of the work that I was writing at the phase that you're describing that bugged me, was like chapter ones that never went anywhere.
Oh, yeah.
As opposed to, and I've just sort of banished them, I think. I don't even, I think in a lot of those are on, like, computers that have died, or they've otherwise been banished blessedly to the void. And that, oh, now you're sending me back now. I did have this one beginning of a novel that just, it had, like, it wanted to be a smart story about trauma and, like, getting through it, but I think at the time I was reading too much, or watching too much trash, and, like, like, the wrong kind of language and scenes and action was infiltrating it, and it came across as, like, disingenuous and didn't work. So even if the core things underneath it were genuine, the ways the languages or the tools that I was trying to use to tell it like weren't successful. So
yeah, I have a lot of shit in my past that I need to unpack, and probably most of it I need to unpack with my therapist rather than on the page. But there
does it all have to go there?
Yeah. But there are definitely things that, like, I know I've tried to unpack on the page before and just, like, completely fallen flat, or just been, like, wholly inappropriate for me to be writing. Like, I'm thinking of all the, like, extremely angry fiction I wrote right after the 2016 election.
Yeah. Maybe the angry ones are more like you know those letters that therapists tell you to write and not send.
It's funny that you should say that, because the current Twitter discourse partly is about Dear Evan Hansen, which, like,
oh geez,
yikes.
Yeah, that's wild. I forgot about that. We don't need to take up time with
we do not need
confirming
to
the details that I remember about Dear Evan Hansen. But yeah.
If you, dear listener, like Dear Evan Hansen, let us not tell you not to like the thing. If you do not like Dear Evan Hansen, you're also fine.
Sure, I think any project most concepts can probably be done well. I cringed reading the summary of that, just in concern of how it might go.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, is what it is.
Yeah. Well, it's maybe fortuitous at this point that this weird blue police box just showed up in the room behind me. So instead of talking about a musical with a 27-year-old playing a teenager in it, maybe we can step into this time machine and go back, and if there's anything that you, present-day 2021 Dave Ring, would like to say to young, creative Dave Ring.
I feel like I had time to think about this wisdom. I know.
The words that you wrote in the doc were, to the question, do you have any words of wisdom, were nope and ha. So
okay, I feel better that my font of wisdom continues to be dry. I think I always stumble upon this sort of a moment because it's hard to imagine becoming the person I am now without making all the mistakes I did, if that makes sense. So as far as advice, maybe it would just be, don't be afraid to make mistakes and make more of the ones that you were too nervous about.
Hell, that's solid advice. I mean,
I'll stick with that then.
Like in a lot of ways, I mean, there are a lot of ways that you can make mistakes and publicly, like, become the main character of Twitter for a day that are more damaging to yourself and others, but there are a lot of mistakes you can make as a writer that don't really hurt anybody other than your ego.
Well, if we're talking a time machine, luckily there wasn't Twitter then, so there but the grace of the bird sight go I, something like that.
So I wanted to take a little bit of time now to talk about Unfettered Hexes, which is coming out soon. I use coming out both in that it is actually going to appear, and it's Pride Month, and this is Queer Tales of Insatiable Darkness, so, we'll just go with that.
It's true. I think it's appropriate for Pride Month and also Wrath Month and whatever other sins you wish to invoke.
I'll go with it.
But, so the book's coming out in October. the stories are all in. I'm waiting on one of the comics, and we just finished the art for each story is all. It's by this artist, incredible artist Matthew Spencer, who is also doing oracle cards for the stories. So I'm saying this wrong.
They're very cool.
We're using the same art for the oracle cards that we are for the chapters. So the folks can also get this oracle deck inspired by all the stories. And we just finished working on all the art yesterday. I say we. I'm just the busybody behind the scenes saying, "Can we do it this way?" And then I slap some text on it. I do have a little bit of design work ahead of me still to get them in form for production, and thinking about just ways of interpretation. And I'm going to be writing the guidebook that comes with the cards. But that's been a really cool, like, witchy project to go with the anthology that I'm really excited that we got to do. So maybe not every anthology is going to perfectly have like an interstitial project like this to work on alongside of it, but I've been really grateful that this one has. So all the witchy things coming October 2021.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Listeners, as always, links will be provided in the show notes so that you can track all of these things down. And is there anything else that's coming out soon that you want to take a second to pump up? I know I have some things that I can pump up for you, for Neon Hemlock.
Oh, well, so there's just we're just doing a lot right now. So without getting too into it, there's 2 books of poetry that are currently at the printer right now. One by Rasha Abdulhadi and one by Joe Reyes Boitel. Also, issue 2 of A Formal Invitation, which is a more literary zine. For the first one, I invited 8 folks that I know from different writing spaces to write a thing and give it to me for the zine. For issue 2, they each invited someone else that they know, and so
very cool.
So that work is in issue 2. Those things. Then We're Here, the best queer speculative fiction 2020 is in design, in layout right now. That's
and who's that edited by again?
Thank you. Charles Pacier and C.L. Clark edited 2020, and then for 2021, L.D. Lewis is coming on board as the guest editor to join Charles.
Fantastic.
Then Baffling Magazine is issue 4, I can count, is July 1st. And that will be our first full year. We'll be out in the world on July 1st. So we're also going to have a book collecting the whole first year that we'll be selling as well. But those stories are all available to read at bafflingmag.com.
That is awesome. And listeners, if you haven't ever gotten anything from Neon Hemlock, I know I'm spending a lot of time gassing this press up. It's only because I love it.
Keep it coming.
I'm not getting paid for any of this right now. But like the production values on everything I've gotten from Neon Hemlock have been spectacular. So if you're the sort of person who likes to read things as an artifact you can hold in your hand, absolutely get that year 1 Baffling book when it comes out. That's
kind of you. We work with a cool printer in Minneapolis, if anyone's curious, too, Bookmobile, and one of the great joys of being a publisher is getting to commission art for things as well. Like I can't downplay that enough. It feels like, it's even greater than commissioning like a portrait of your D&D character or whatever. Yeah. It's times 100 that.
Yeah. I mean, I have commissioned 2 works of art for this show. I commissioned the logo when I first conceived of the show and worked with an artist who I've been friends with for a long time. now, Hannah Russell, and then worked last summer with Ryan Boyd to commission a theme song for the show that just absolutely slaps. I just finished editing May's episode last night, and I just, like, every time I finish editing an episode, I go and take a listen straight through that song, because it just, like, blows me away every time, just because it's like, yeah, this is a thing I spent money on, and it came out, like, my creative brief was, like, 12 words and 18 question marks, and Ryan took it and turned this amazing 1.5-minute track out for me, and, you know, so I feel you on that with commissioning art.
Yeah, they're like, I don't know if it's quite the word, but the gestalts of getting to come together with other creatives to do stuff that you couldn't do on your own is definitely one of the most rewarding and kind of not self-perpetuating, but motivating parts about, you know, being part of a press and kind of pushing that stuff forward. So it's not just you're making stuff for yourself. It's like you're building something with your community. So
yeah. Real quick, one other thing that I'd like to mention, since I mentioned earlier the submission period I have open right now. I believe that at the time this episode goes live, the 2023 novella submission period will be open for people of color. And
yep, and then so we've got a 2-week submission period. I don't have the dates right in front of me, in June, and then for writers of color, and then for all writers in October, and they're all for the 2023 novella series.
Details can be found on Neon Hemlock's website, and of course in the show notes as well. I just want to pump that up because if you like the things that you've seen so far from the novella series, I know that we had Caitlin Starling on last year right before Yellow Jessamine came out, and that's just an absolutely fantastic book. I am currently reading an arc of one of this year's novellas that is just blowing me away, and so if you want more work like that, why not submit your own? Shoot your shot.
Give us your stories.
Give Dave your stories. Dave, where can our listeners find you on the internet?
So you can find me, like, personally, myself, dave-ring.com, and then Neon Hemlock stuff is at neonhemlock.com. And then if you're on Twitter, my username or handle or whatever is SlickHop, and then Neon Hemlock is still Neon Hemlock.
Fantastic. Dave, thank you so much for being on the show. It's
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure, yeah. Listeners, stick around next month when our guests will be John Apple and L.D. Lewis. It's going to be a blast.
Very cool.
Tales from the Trunk is mixed and produced in beautiful Oakland, California. Our theme music is Paper Wings by Ryan Boyd. You can support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/trunkcast. All patrons of the show now get a sticker and logo button, along with show outtakes and other content that can't be found anywhere else. You can find the show on Twitter at Trunkcast, and I tweet at HBBisniaks. If you like the show, consider taking a moment to rate and review us on your preferred podcast platform. And remember, don't self-reject.